9 words. This year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small. I looked at the snow piling up on the porch, and put the phone down. They thought they could cut me out of Christmas. Fine. I would open my doors to the whole town. That night, as lights covered the eaves of the $7 million ranch my family never knew I owned, the phone started ringing. The first call was from Mom. The third was from a lawyer. The fifth changed our history. My name is Peyton Hughes, and I am 32 years old. I was sitting in my house in Helena, Montana, reading a text message from my mother when the idea for the dinner was born. The house was quiet, insulated by 2 feet of fresh snow that had fallen before dawn. The text itself was brutally efficient. 9 words that did the work of a guillotine. This year, just your sister's family. Just your sister's family. Keeping it small. I read it twice. The high-altitude air in my living room seemed to thin, pulling the warmth from my skin. It was not a wet, dramatic cold like the Ohio winters I grew up with. This was the Montana cold, dry, absolute, and impersonal. It was the kind of cold that found any weakness and settled in. I felt it slide past my wool sweater and into my chest. It was the feeling of being cut from the list, a sensation I recognized not as a new wound, but as the final press on an old bruise. This wasn't just an uninvitation, it was an eraser, the final neat red line through my name. For years, I had been the addendum, the +1 at my own family's table, the guest whose presence was tolerated as long as it did not inconvenience the main event, my sister Karen. Now, I had not even made the footnotes. Keeping it small was a clean, corporate lie. It meant keeping it to the people who mattered. I was not one of them. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could feel the pull of the old script, the polite, wounded query, "Oh, is everything okay?" or the passive-aggressive jab, "Hope everything is fine," or even the raw pleading, "Why?" I did none of those things. Instead, I placed my phone face down on the heavy oak desk. The silence in the house rushed in to fill the space the text had occupied. It was a deliberate, heavy silence, a non-response, an acknowledgement of a truth I had spent my life trying to code around. I was not part of their equation. My gaze drifted from the phone to my laptop. I did not dwell. I did not cry. I acted. I opened the encrypted drive on my laptop, typed in a 32-character password, and clicked on the folder labeled Sanctuary. Inside, a subfolder, River Glass. The first photo loaded. It was not a house, it was a promise. River Glass was my $7 million secret, a fortress of solitude and glass tucked away in Paradise Valley, looking out over the Gallatin Range. I had bought it 2 years ago with the first payout from my company, and no one in my family knew it existed. To them, I was still Peyton in Montana, the eccentric daughter who ran some little computer thing and lived in a modest house in Helena. They had never asked for the address of River Glass, and I had never offered it. I clicked through the images, the massive reclaimed timber beams, the stone fireplace tall enough for a man to stand in, the sheer glass walls that erased the boundary between the living space and the snow-covered peaks. Then I stopped on the one I was looking for, the Great Hall, and in it, the table. It was a single, magnificent piece of polished black walnut running 40 feet down the center of the hall, easily seating 30 people. I had commissioned it specifically, a table built for a feast, a table built with no head, a table currently sitting empty, reflecting the cold mountain light. A question formed in my mind, not with bitterness, but with the cool clarity of an engineering problem. If I am not welcome at their table, why not set my own? The solution was immediate. The date was open. The table was waiting. The guests were available. The spark did not just catch. It detonated. A charity dinner, but not a sterile corporate fundraiser, not for the poor in the abstract. It would be for the forgotten. The theme clicked into place with the force of a locking mechanism. This dinner would be for the people on the periphery, the ones who, like me, were used to being the footnote, the maybe, the if there's room. This was not a whim, it was an algorithm. I opened a new secure group message. I bypassed the main Hughes family chat entirely. I knew it would be filling up with Karen's photos of her perfect children making perfect gingerbread cookies, punctuated by my mother's replies of heart emojis. My stomach did not twist. I felt nothing. I scrolled through my contacts, pulling names for a new list. Cousin Jonah, the carpenter. He was always summoned to Thanksgivings with his toolbox to fix a loose step, or a rattling pipe, but was always seated at the folding card table in the hallway, never at the main table. Aunt Sarah, the eccentric one, the artist who lived in a yurt near Bozeman, she was only ever invited for dessert. A second cousin from my father's side, the one who had lost his job in the tech layoffs, and had been quietly told by his own parents that maybe it was better to sit this Christmas out to save everyone the embarrassment. I titled the new group chat, The Periphery. I paused, my fingers on the keyboard. I had to be honest with myself. Was this revenge? I interrogated the motive. Running a diagnostic on my own code. Revenge was loud. Revenge was about burning their table to the ground. This was different. This was about building a better one. This was not about showing them I was rich. I had long given up trying to impress people who refused to see me. This was about using the resources I had earned to validate the very people they had collectively dismissed. This was about restoration. I was not the one left out. I was the one hosting a simple, powerful shift in the variable. I was giving a seat back to everyone who had ever had theirs pulled out from under them. And in doing so, I was finally claiming my own. The engineer in me took over. The event needed parameters. Rule 1, one table, the long, magnificent walnut table, no kids' table, no folding tables, no overflow in the kitchen. Everyone sat at the same table, or no one did. Rule 2, no hierarchy. The guest of honor was the person sitting next to you. Rule 3, no status. You did not talk about your job title, your net worth, or your connections. You talked about your story. The logistics came next. I went into my phone settings. I found the Hughes family group chat. Mute notifications indefinitely. I went to the individual contacts. Mom, Dad, Karen, silence, all calls. A digital firewall went up, clean and efficient. Then I opened a different list. It was a private list I had kept in a contacts app for years, labeled simply neighbors and strays. This was not a list of colleagues or connections, this was my real network. The elderly woman from the Helena Farmers Market, who sold me eggs and whose husband had left her with a mountain of debt. The retired carpenter, who had fixed my fence last year and refused payment. The young barista at the coffee shop downtown, the one with the tired eyes, who was working 3 jobs and could not afford to fly home to Vermont. The quiet librarian who had lost her partner. These were the people I had quietly helped over the years, and who, in their own small ways, had helped me. This was my real family. I opened my notebook, the leather-bound one I used for algorithms, not for feelings. I flipped to a clean page. I wrote the date at the top, event title, the Reverb table. I sketched the layout of the hall, the position of the table relative to the fireplace, and at the bottom of the page, in clean block capitals, I wrote 2 words and circled them twice, calls. It was not a question of if, it was a question of when. This act, however pure its motive, would not be silent. It would have consequences. I knew that. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to let the phone ring. I looked up. I had been sitting there for perhaps an hour. The weak winter sun was already beginning to drop, and the light in Helena was turning that deep, bruised purple that only happens in a Montana winter. My cocoa, made hours ago before the text, was cold. Its steam had left a perfect, fading circle of fog on the glass pane of my window. Through that circle, I watched my own porch lights click on, their small, warm bulbs reflecting on the fresh, undisturbed snow. The contrast was perfect, the absolute, unforgiving cold outside, and the plan now igniting inside me. I turned back to the laptop. I opened the periphery group chat and my neighbor's strays email list. I typed one clear message. No sentimentality, just facts. I am hosting a dinner, Christmas Eve, 6 p.m. at Riverglass. I pasted the address, the one no one in Ohio had, the one that if they Googled it, would show them exactly what they had cut out. I paused, then added the final line, the price of admission, come to Riverglass at 6. Bring the story of a time you were forgotten. I hit send. The blue message notification flew. The work had begun. As the last invitation vanished into the digital ether, the silence of my Helena house rushed back in, but it brought company. The past arrived not as a gentle fog, but as a series of sharp, decisive data points, like telemetry from a failed launch. Toledo, Ohio, a humid, sprawling suburb where the lawns were wide and the ambitions were narrow. My childhood was a fixed system, a simple solar model. My sister Karen was the sun. She was bright, dazzling, and generated her own weather systems. She did not have to ask for attention, she drew it by gravitational pull. I was not the moon, which at least gets to reflect the light. I was the hallway light, the 20-watt utility bulb, functional, taken for granted, and only noticed when it burned out. My obsession with tables, I realized now, started there. We had a formal dining room, a space reserved for holidays and important Sundays. It was dominated by a heavy, dark mahogany table. There was always a seating hierarchy, my parents, my grandparents when they visited, my aunt, and Karen. Karen, 3 years my senior, had been granted a permanent seat at the adult table since she was 10. She was, my mother always said, mature for her age. I was Peyton. My spot was the folding card table in the adjoining kitchen, usually shared with a much younger cousin who still ate with his hands. On nights when it was just the nuclear family, I was often directed to the sofa in the living room. Just easier this way, honey. We are all tired. There was always one empty chair at the mahogany table. It was positioned between my father and my aunt. It was, by unspoken rule, the chair that was not mine. I learned to balance a plate on my knees. I learned that my voice, pitched from the living room, did not carry over the sound of their laughter. I learned that my contributions were not required for the main event to proceed. The memory that defines this, the one that serves as the root file for the entire project, arrived with the clarity of a freshly compiled script. It was my sophomore year of high school. Karen was a senior. I had spent 6 months in the garage, which smelled of damp concrete and motor oil, teaching myself to code in C++ from a thick, outdated textbook I had bought at a thrift store. I was building a chaotic system model for weather prediction. Using 3 salvaged circuit boards from a scrapyard and a flickering discarded monitor, I won the Tri-State Science Fair. It was not a small thing. It was the largest regional competition in the Midwest. The prize was a heavy bronze medal and a $500 scholarship. I remember walking home, the medal cold against my shirt, the oversized certificate clutched in my hand. I walked into the house, and it was chaos. Bouquets of roses crowded the entryway. My father was on the phone, his voice booming, "The Gazette is sending a photographer." My mother was frantically trying to find a good frame. Karen had just been crowned homecoming queen. I stood in the doorway, waiting for a pause in the celebration. "Mom? Dad?" My mother turned, saw me, and smiled, a brief, distracted flash of light. "Oh, Peyton, hi. Can you believe it? Our Karen, Queen. I held up the medal. I won the tri-state, I said. My voice sounded small. Oh, that's wonderful, honey, my mother said, her eyes already scanning the mantelpiece, clearly visualizing Karen's crown. That's so nice. Can you grab the silver polish from under the sink? I want this frame to shine. My father hung up the phone and clapped his hands. All right, team. The photographer will be here at 6. He finally registered me. He glanced at the bronze disc in my hand. What's that? Science fair. Good job, kid. Hey, Karen's photo is going to be front page of the lifestyle section. Can you imagine? I stood there in the hallway under the dim utility light. And in that moment, the central thesis of my life was proven. No one was being deliberately cruel. Cruelty requires intent. It requires acknowledging the target's existence long enough to aim. They were just forgetful. They had forgotten to look in my direction. I was an anomaly, a data point that did not fit their narrative. So, I retreated. The garage became my sanctuary. While Karen practiced her valedictorian speech in her bedroom, I was soldering wires. While my parents planned her graduation party, I was reverse engineering a network protocol. The world outside my family might be indifferent, but the machine was not. The machine required precision. It did not care about homecoming queens, it only cared if the logic was sound. If you wrote a line of code, the system had to read it. You could not be skipped. I found a scrap of paper, and taped it to the wall above my salvaged monitor. I wrote 2 words on it in black marker, "You matter." It was not an affirmation, it was a statement of fact to the system. I did. My escape velocity was achieved via a full-ride scholarship to Midwest Tech, a fictional mecca of engineering 6 hours away. I presented the acceptance letter to my parents at the dinner table. This time, I had a seat. Karen had already moved out. My father studied the letter. His brow furrowed. Midwest Tech. That's very far, Peyton. It's so specialized. Is that practical? My mother touched the letter, as if it were radioactive. Karen is so happy, just down the road at Toledo State. She's getting a business degree. It's sensible. She waved at the letter. This seems a little extreme, honey. Just be realistic. Be realistic. That was their polite code for, do not be bigger than the space we have allotted for you. Do not inconvenience us with ambitions we do not understand. I left 2 weeks after my graduation. I packed my 2 suitcases into my rusted Honda Civic and drove west. Those 4 years at Midwest Tech were the crucible. I spent every Christmas in the dorm. The campus was a ghost town, a brutalist concrete landscape locked in ice. The heating in the residence halls was turned down to skeleton levels to save money. I remember the echoing silence of the empty corridors, the grey light of a December afternoon filtering through the frosted glass. I would sit in my room. The cinder block walls, painted a sterile, depressing beige, and I would stare at the empty, snow-covered quad. But my laptop screen was warm. My code was warm. I learned about logistics. I learned about asynchronous networks and critical path analysis. I built systems for optimizing supply chains. I ate stale sandwiches from the single open vending machine and drank burnt coffee from the communal pot in the lobby. I did not call home. They did not call me. They were busy with Karen's real life. Her first job, her engagement, her wedding, the keeping it small, had been their operating procedure for decades. After graduation, the real world was no better. I applied for jobs at major logistics and tech firms. The rejection letters all said variations of the same thing. lack of interpersonal experience, not a culture fit, too specialized. I was sitting in my tiny post-grad apartment, staring at a stack of beige rejection envelopes, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was still waiting for an invitation. I was still standing in the hallway holding my medal, hoping someone at the main table would notice. I was trying to optimize myself for a system that did not have a seat for me. The solution was obvious. It was terrifying. It was the only way. I would stop asking for a seat. I would build my own company. I would build my own table. This was the first piece of the puzzle. This was the moment the idea for Riverglass was truly born. Long before I had the money, it was not just about success, it was about control. It was about building a system where the metrics were transparent, where performance was the only currency, and where no one was forgotten because the algorithm depended on everyone. This was the genesis of Dry Dock Relief. My early successes, when I bothered to share them, were met with profound confusion. My achievements were not in the format they recognized. Karen's successes were tangible, photogenic, a promotion to regional manager at the bank, a new, larger house in a better suburb, a beautiful, photogenic child. My successes were lines of code, reduced latency, optimized routing for disaster supplies. My mother asked me once during a rare phone call, "But what do you actually make, Peyton? Can I hold it?" They wanted trophies. I was building infrastructure. I remember one night years ago, coding through another lonely holiday, staring at the screen until the letters blurred. I was fixing a bug that was routing medical supplies to the wrong zip code. I fixed it. I redeployed the build, and I whispered it into the cold, still air of my small apartment. One day, I will build a room so big and a table so long that I can invite everyone. Every single person who was ever left in the hallway, every person who was told to be realistic, every person who was forgotten. The memories receded, depositing me back into the present, the house in Helena, the laptop screen now filled with the first tentative replies. "Peyton, is this real? Riverglass? Where is that?" The vow I made in that cold, cinder block dorm room was now being executed. Riverglass was the room. The 40-foot walnut table was waiting. And the forgotten were, for the first time, the only ones on the guest list. Dry Dock Relief was not born from a desire to be rich. It was born from a garage, like my science fair project. And it was born from anger. Not the hot, loud kind of anger, but the cold, focused anger of an engineer watching a system fail. It was 3 years post-graduation. I was living in a small apartment in Boise, working a dead-end data entry job that paid the rent and nothing more. That summer, the wildfires were apocalyptic. The entire West seemed to be burning. I was watching the news, not the human interest stories, but the logistics feeds. I saw trucks loaded with respirators and burn kits idling in parking lots, waiting for dispatch orders. I saw volunteer coordinators using whiteboards and paper maps. I saw chaos. The problem was not a lack of resources, it was a lack of routing. The systems being used were 20 years old, designed for a world that moved at the speed of a fax machine. I did not sleep for 72 hours, fueled by a case of cheap energy drinks and a burning, familiar sense of rage, the rage of seeing the necessary, functional thing being ignored. I built the prototype. I wrote an algorithm that scraped real-time road closure data from transportation departments, weather data from NOAA, and shelter capacity reports from the Red Cross. It was a dynamic routing protocol that treated disaster relief not as a series of static destinations, but as a constantly shifting, asynchronous network. It prioritized need, availability, and travel time all at once. I called a dry dock, a safe harbor for vital supplies. I quit my job the following Monday. I poured my entire $5,000 savings account into registering the company as a public benefit corporation. The next 2 years were a blow of cold floors and lukewarm coffee. I lived out of a co-working space in Bozeman, sleeping on a beanbag chair in the quiet room. I survived on small, $5,000 grants from local community foundations, and once a $2,000 prize from a regional tech pitch competition. I was the CEO, the lead programmer, the janitor, and the entire sales team. I remember the smell of industrial carpet cleaner, and the constant low-level hum of the servers. My family thought I was insane, or worse, a failure. "You have a degree, Peyton," my mother's voice would say over the phone, tight with disapproval. "Karen is already a vice president at the bank. They are looking at a house with a pool. When are you going to get a real job?" I stopped answering her calls. The breakthrough came from a place no one else was looking, a tiny remote mountain county in northern Idaho. They had one full-time emergency manager, an ex-firefighter named S. Their annual budget for technology was less than I paid for server space in a month. He found me through a forum for emergency responders. "I read your white paper," he said, his voice gravelly. "It makes sense. The big guys won't even talk to us. We have 3,000 people and one road in, one road out. That road floods every spring and burns every summer. Can your algorithm help me?" I drove 8 hours to meet him. I gave him the system for free on a 1-year trial. 6 months later, a blizzard hit. A mudslide took out a secondary access road. The state system told dispatchers the county was inaccessible for 48 hours. My system, Dry Dock, had already logged a local logging company's private plowed access route. A route cell had manually entered into our database. Our system rerouted a critical shipment of dialysis medication and insulin. It arrived 12 hours before the state even knew the main road was clear. It did not just save time, it saved the lives of at least 3 people who could not miss their next treatment. S called the local paper. The Clearwater Gazette ran a small, below-the-fold story. "Montana Tech Platform Saves Mountain Residents." It was the first validation, the first time the system I built, the system I was had been seen as essential. I screenshot the article, and in a moment of weakness, of stupid lingering hope, I texted it to my family's group chat. My father replied an hour later. "That's nice, Peyton. Good for you. Just remember, pride comes before a fall." "Don't go bragging about it," Karen replied with a thumbs-up emoji. My mother never replied at all. I looked at the text, at the casual, almost reflexive way they minimized it. "Don't brag. Don't be seen. Don't take up space." I deleted the entire message thread. I went back to work. Then came the pandemic. The world shut down. The global supply chain snapped. Suddenly, logistics were not a boring back-end problem, they were the only thing that mattered. While major corporations were still figuring out how to use Zoom, Dry Dock Relief was already built for remote, asynchronous coordination. My system, designed for wildfires and blizzards, was redeployed to manage the flood of volunteer-driven deliveries, PPE to rural hospitals, food bank supplies to lockdown housing projects, prescription deliveries to the elderly. My little mountain county algorithm became the logistical backbone for volunteer networks in 3 states, then 10, then 20. We were not the big guys. We were the ones who worked. We were the utility light in the hallway, and the whole world, it turned out, was a hallway. By the end of the 2nd year, the big guys noticed. Northline Systems, a logistics behemoth based in Seattle, had been embarrassed by their own slow response. They had tried to build a competing platform and failed. So, they decided to buy mine. The first offer was $50 million. I said no. They came back with 100. I said no. They flew me to Seattle. I sat in their sterile, grey boardroom across a table so polished I could see my own tired reflection in it. They were all men, all in identical, expensive, ill-fitting suits. They did not understand what I had built. They just knew it worked, and they wanted it. "What do you want, Ms. Hughes?" the CEO finally asked, exasperated. $180 million, I said, and an earn-out provision, but that's not the main thing. I pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a clause I had drafted with a pro bono lawyer I knew from the co-working days. It stipulated that a small, ongoing percentage of the platform's dividends, my earn-out, would be permanently diverted into a community fund I controlled, a fund with no oversight from them. I called it the Riverglass Community Fund. I had already picked out the name, though I had not yet found the place. They saw the percentage. It was tiny, almost a rounding error on a deal that size. They agreed. The deal closed on a Tuesday. The press release from Northline Systems was a masterpiece of corporate erasure. It lauded their strategic acquisition and innovative expansion. My name, Peyton Hughes, the founder and architect, was mentioned once in the 8th paragraph, misspelled. My old team, the 3 coders and 1 operations manager, who had stuck with me from the beanbag chair days, called me, weeping with joy. My family, when I finally called to tell them, was silent. I could hear my mother processing the number, $180 million. It was a figure that did not compute with their narrative of me. "Well," my father said after a long, static-filled pause, "I hope you're going to be smart with that. Money doesn't buy taste, Peyton." "Karen's family could really use a new sunroom," my mother added, her voice suddenly bright and false. I hung up the phone. I realized with a clarity that was as cold and sharp as the Montana air that to them, I was not a person. I was a failed investment that had suddenly, inexplicably, paid out. I took the money. I paid my team. I set up their trusts. And then I disappeared. I bought a ticket to Bozeman. I told no one where I was going. I rented a truck and just drove. I drove into the mountains, into the place my system had gotten its first validation. I drove until the cell service died. I drove into Paradise Valley. I found it on a defunct realty listing, a property that had been tied up in probate for a decade. It was not a mansion, it was a fortress. It was built of riverstone and massive, unplaned logs with a roof of overlapping slate. It sat on 300 acres, looking over a private lake that froze in the winter into a perfect grey-blue mirror. It was isolated. It was strong. It was transparent, with entire walls of glass facing the mountains. It was everything my childhood home was not. I paid cash. The $7 million was a fraction of the payout. I named it Riverglass after the fund. This was my sanctuary. This was the one place their judgment, their expectations, their endless, hungry comparisons to Karen could not reach. I did not give them the address. I did not send pictures. This house, this land, this table I was building, this was mine. I spent the first year there alone, just walking the land, watching the snow fall on the frozen lake. The long walnut table was the first and only piece of furniture I commissioned. It was delivered in 3 massive pieces and assembled in the Great Hall, a monument to a new kind of gathering. The seating at the charity dinner was not a conscious thought, it was an inevitability. It was the physical manifestation of the vow I had made in my dorm room. Riverglass was the room. The table was waiting. All it needed was the invitation, or in my case, the uninvitation. My mother's 9-word text was not an insult, it was the final, necessary line of code to execute the program I had been writing my entire life. The preparations for the Riverglass table began not with logistics, but with assent. I bypassed the high-end catering companies from Bozeman and Jackson Hole. Their food was complex, architectural, and cold. I needed food that felt like a fireplace. I drove 40 minutes to a small house in Livingston, tucked away on a street shaded by cottonwoods. I knocked on the door of Nora Bell. Nora was 70, retired from a legendary Michelin-starred restaurant in Seattle that she had walked away from at the height of her fame. She had moved to Montana, she said, to smell sagebrush instead of truffle oil. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but they smelled permanently of cinnamon and baked bread. She opened the door, wiping flour on an apron that had seen better decades. Peyton Hughes, she said, her eyes sharp and assessing. You run that rescue software. You're early. I'm not here for the community fund meeting, Nora. I'm here to hire you. I told her my plan, not the revenge part, not the family part. I told her about the theme, the forgotten. I told her I had a table that seated 28, and I wanted to fill it on Christmas Eve. She listened, her head tilted. You want a menu, then? I want food that feels like an apology, I said. I want food that you can hear. Food that feels like validation. Nora was silent for a long moment, looking past me at the snow on her lawn. Validation, she repeated. She looked at her own hands. That's a tall order for a meal. Most people just want prime rib. She finally met my gaze. A menu you can hear. I like that. It will cost you. I can pay. Not money, she said, almost scolding. It will cost you my quiet Christmas, which means I'm in. But we do this my way. No shortcuts, no processed anything. We'll need 3 days to prep. The menu she designed was not about luxury. It was about depth. Slow-roasted duck with a wild huckleberry reduction, the skin so crisp you could hear it break. A 12-hour braised beef short rib with sage and juniper, so tender it dissolved. For the non-meat eaters, a deep dish chanterelle and caramelized onion tart, impossibly rich. And for dessert, simple wild apple tarts, the apples sourced from an abandoned orchard. Nora knew about the crust made with hand-churned butter. While Nora began her alchemy in the massive river-glass kitchen, I focused on the hall. The space was beautiful, but it was sterile. It was my sanctuary, but it wasn't yet ours. I did not hire a decorating crew. I called Cousin Jonah. He showed up in his battered pickup, carrying his toolbox. This is some place, Peyton, he said. Staring up at the 30-foot rafters, a long way from the card table in the hall. That's the point, Jonah. Grab that ladder. We spent 8 hours hanging lights, not the sharp, blue-white LED lights of a modern Christmas. We strung hundreds of feet of simple, vintage-style incandescent bulbs, the ones with the warm yellow filament. We wrapped them around the massive timber beams, letting them drape down. When we finished, the entire hall was bathed in a glow that felt as warm as Nora's ovens. We brought the outside in, but gently. We hung garlands of dried orange slices, cinnamon sticks, and pine boughs. The only candles were pure, heavy pillars of beeswax. The room soon filled with the scent of pine, citrus, and honey, mingling with the smell of Nora's braising beef. It smelled like a memory of a Christmas I had never actually had. And then the table, the 40-foot solid black walnut table. I ran my hands over it. It was the centerpiece. It was the event. I had 28 chairs. I had collected them over the last 2 years from antique shops and estate sales. Not a single one matched. There was a heavy oak captain's chair, a delicate Victorian velvet seat, a simple shaker-style bench. Each chair had a history, a previous life. Each one was a stray. The guest list was finalized, 28 names. Jonah and his wife. Aunt Sarah, the artist. My former neighbor. Mark, The brilliant aerospace engineer who had been laid off and was now delivering packages, his pride shattered. Ms. Albee, the single preschool teacher from Helena, who was raising her 3 grandchildren on a salary that was a rounding error. The quiet librarian, the carpenter who had fixed my fence. The group was complete. The periphery. This, I knew, was the most critical part, the gifts. My family gave gifts that were obligations, checks written in sharp, angry numbers, or items meant to improve the recipient. Karen once gave me a subscription to a weight loss program. My gifts were acknowledgements. I had spent weeks on them. For Jonah, who had always patched our family's mistakes with his hands, I had sourced a set of vintage Japanese chisels, razor sharp, with hand-carved handles. For Aunt Sarah, who painted with whatever she could afford, I had found a box of rare imported mineral pigments from Italy, lapis lazuli blue, malachite green. For Mark, the engineer, I found a pristine 19th century brass sextant, a tool of navigation for someone who felt lost. For Ms. Albee, I gave a simple, heavy envelope of cash, enough to cover her mortgage for 6 months, tucked inside a hand-knit cashmere blanket. And for every guest, I had spent hours in the archives of the local library and scrolling through old social media feeds. I found a single photograph from their past, a moment they seemed truly happy, truly themselves, a childhood Polaroid, a grainy high school photo, a snapshot with a beloved pet. I had them professionally restored and framed in simple reclaimed wood. The place cards were the last step. I took a stack of heavy cream-colored card stock with my best black ink. I wrote each name, and beneath each name I wrote the same 4 words, "We sit as equals." This dinner could not just be an indulgence. It had to serve the same purpose dry dock relief did. It had to be functional. It had to help. I used the framework of the Riverglass Community Fund. I set up a new anonymous donation line. I seeded it myself with a significant 6-figure sum. I called it the Winter Warmth Fund. The purpose was simple: to pay the heating bills for any elderly resident in our county living in a home built before 1950. I knew the Montana cold, and I knew how it preyed on old, drafty houses and fixed incomes. I sent a final text to the periphery group: "One last thing, this night is for us. It is not for the outside world. When you arrive, there will be a wooden box by the door. Please leave your phones there. This is a sanctuary. No social media, no location tags, no selfies." I paused, then added a concession. "We can take one picture, a single group photo with the table, but only if everyone agrees and it stays in this chat." It was a mistake. The night before the dinner, the great hall was set. The 28 mismatched chairs were angled at the table. The 28 gifts were wrapped in simple brown paper and twine. The lights glowed against the dark wood. The blizzard had started outside, the snow swirling against the massive glass walls. Nora came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at the table, at the place cards, at the single long line of seats. She looked at the roaring fireplace at the far end of the room. She walked over and put her warmed, flour-dusted hand on my arm. "Peyton," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I know what you're doing. You told me you wanted to serve validation." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "You're not serving dinner, honey. You're serving justice." I smiled back, but the word echoed. Justice. Justice was not a quiet, artisanal meal. Justice was loud. It was a confrontation. It was the opposite of the silent retreat I had built. I went to my office and opened my leather-bound notebook. I looked at the note I had scribbled weeks ago, when I first sent the invitations. Calls. L's risk. I checked my security settings. I had already diverted the rancher's landline to an answering service. My personal cell was scrubbed from public databases. My family was silenced. I felt safe. I felt insulated. Protected by $7 million of stone, wood, and code, I had built a fortress. But I had forgotten that the most dangerous breach is never the front gate, it is the single trusted guest who holds the key. I had forgotten that a photograph, once shared, is no longer a memory. It is a piece of data, and data, I, of all people, knew, always finds a way to be seen. At 5:30, the first headlights appeared. The snow was coming down hard now, thick and heavy, the kind that deadens all sound. It was falling so densely that the long private gravel road to Riverglass was already a white track. The headlights cut through the blue twilight, a slow, tentative procession. One by one, my guests arrived, not in polished town cars, but in snow-caked Subarus, old Ford trucks, and sensible Toyotas. I stood in the massive doorway, the warm, golden light of the great hall spilling out onto the stone porch behind me, the smell of braised beef and pine rolling out into the cold. Beside the door sat the heavy oak-topped box for their phones. Aunt Sarah was first. She stepped inside, her eyes wide, brushing snow from her handmade wool coat. She looked around at the high beams, the roaring fireplace, the 40-foot table set for a feast. "Peyton," she breathed. I thought this was a potluck. This is Riverglass," I said, taking her coat. "And that is your seat." I pointed to the Victorian velvet chair. "Welcome, Aunt Sarah." She dutifully, if confusedly, dropped her phone into the box. They came in a quiet rush after that. Mark, the laid-off engineer, looking nervous in a clean-pressed shirt, his shoulders slumped. Miss Albee, the preschool teacher, holding the hands of her two eldest grandchildren, who looked terrified. And ahead, of course, accounted for them, there were seats and gifts for all three. Then Jonah. He stamped his boots on the mat, his cheeks red from the cold. He was not empty-handed. Tucked under his arm, he carried 3 wooden folding chairs. He saw me looking at them and grinned. "Habit," he said, his voice booming in the entryway. "Figured you might run out of room. Figured someone might need the hallway." I felt a sharp, sudden tightness in my throat. He, of all people, understood. "Jonah," I said, "I have a seat for you at the table." "I know," he said, winking. "These are just in case we need to make this table longer every year. You keep building, Peyton. I'll keep bringing chairs." He set them by the door. A promise. The last to arrive was my grandmother, Grandma Ray. She was the only one from that side of the family I had invited. She was my grandfather's widow, the one who had always slipped me $10 bills, the one who had actually read my science fair report. She was in her 80s, frail, and leaned heavily on a silver-headed cane. Jonah and I had to help her up the stone steps. She stopped at the threshold of the great hall. She did not look up at the lights. She did not look at the fireplace. She looked at the table. She looked at the 28 mismatched chairs, all pulled out, all waiting, all equal. Slowly, she let go of my arm. Using her cane, she walked the length of the table. She ran her gnarled, papery hand over the smooth, dark walnut. From the head of the table all the way down to the end. She touched the back of Jonah's chair. She touched the small chair I had set for Miss Albee's granddaughter. She touched the place card that read, Mark. She reached the end and turned to me, her eyes clear and sharp. Finally, she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "Finally, a place for everyone." I looked around the room. The guests were mingling, drawn to the heat of the fire. They were strangers, mostly, connected only by their shared history of being overlooked. They were quiet, hesitant, as if expecting to be told this was a mistake. The final count was made, 27 guests, 1 host. The table was full. My sister Karen was not there. My parents were not there. Their absence was not a hole, it was the atmosphere. It was the oxygen we were breathing. For the first time in my life, a room felt complete because they were not in it. I tapped a small silver bell. If everyone could please find their seat. Welcome. They moved toward the table, finding their names on the cream-colored cards. We sit as equals. I saw Mark, the engineer, read the words and frown, confused, before Ms. Albee sat next to him and struck up a conversation about the snow. I went to the corner of the room to the vintage turntable I had set up. I slid a record from its sleeve, a classic, warm instrumental Christmas album. I dropped the needle. The soft analog crackle filled the room, followed by the gentle, swelling strings of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Nora and her small team began to serve. There was no buffet line. Platters were brought to the table family style, the duck, the beef, the fragrant tarts. The room filled with the sounds of real, deep conversation, of plates being passed, of wine being poured. I stood at my own seat near the middle, across from Grandma Ray. I raised my glass. I want to thank you all for coming, I said. My voice was steady. I know this is a busy night. I wanted to gather a specific group of people. This table, this house, it was built for this. It was built for everyone who has ever been told to sit in the kitchen. Jonah raised his glass. For everyone who was ever told to wait in the hall. For everyone who was told their accomplishments were nice, but not practical. For everyone who was told to keep it small or sit this one out. Ms. Albee's eyes welled with tears. Tonight, there are no side tables. There are no folding chairs in the kitchen. There is no kids' table and no adults' table. There is only this table. And at this table, everyone has a view of the fire. You are not forgotten. You are the only ones who were invited. Welcome to River Glass. The dinner that followed was the single warmest event of my life. People opened their gifts with quiet, stunned gratitude. Jonah examined his chisels as if they were holy relics. Aunt Sarah held the small framed photo of her younger self at her first art show, and wept silently into her napkin. The conversation was real. People were not talking about their jobs or their houses. They were, as I had requested, sharing their stories. Stories of being overlooked, of being minimized, of being told they were not enough. And in the warm, firelit hall, surrounded by stone and glass and snow, those stories lost their power to wound, they became badges of survival. It was Miss Albee who suggested it. Oh, Peyton, this is the most beautiful night. We must have a picture, just one to remember. A chorus of agreement went up. Okay, I said, smiling. One picture, but just for us. It stays in our group chat. No posting it anywhere else. Everyone agreed. The rule was clear. This sanctuary was protected. I retrieved my phone from my pocket, the only phone active in the room. I set it up on a small tripod I kept on the mantel. I set the timer for 10 seconds. Everyone squeeze in. I hit the button and ran to my seat, sliding in between Grandma Ray and Jonah. I looked down the table at the 28 faces, all lit by the fire and the warm incandescent lights. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. The camera flashed. I walked back and checked the image. It was perfect. It was a snapshot of a world I had built from scratch. It captured the 40-foot table, the glowing lights, the massive stone hearth, and 28 people who, for one night, were the center of the universe. I opened the Periphery group chat. I attached the photo and pressed send. For us, I typed, to remember. My phone buzzed almost immediately, as the 27 phones in the wooden box by the door lit up with the notification. The dinner resumed, the vinyl record finished, and the arm clicked back into place. The song was over. An hour later, Nora was serving the wild apple tarts. The conversation was loud and joyous. I was deep in a debate with Mark about celestial navigation when Aunt Sarah, flushed with wine and happiness, retrieved her phone from the box. "I just want to look at it again," she said to Jonah. I want to show my friend in Bozeman. She would understand." I did not see it. I was busy. I was present. I did not see her open the photo. I did not see her, in her 70-year-old analog confusion, fumble with the share options. I did not see her mistake share to friends for sending message. The photo, stripped of all its context, breached the firewall. It left the sanctuary. It left the periphery chat. It hit her public feed. A photograph of a feast, a table groaning with food, a room that looked like a $7 million lodge, and in the center, me, Peyton Hughes, the daughter who was not at her family's small Christmas. It took less than 30 minutes for the image to find its way through a chain of shocked and gossiping mutual friends from Bozeman, Montana, to Toledo, Ohio. I felt it before I saw it. A cold dread, a sudden shift in the atmosphere. I was laughing at one of Jonah's jokes when my phone in my pocket vibrated. A single, sharp buzz. My blood turned to ice. My phone was on Do Not Disturb. The only things that could get through were the periphery group chat notifications, which I had just sent, unless it was a direct call from a number I had not fully blocked, only muted. My hands trembled. I discreetly pulled the phone from my pocket, keeping it under the level of the table. The screen was black, but one notification pulsed on the lock screen: "Missed call, Mom." I stared at it. The warmth of the room, the smell of apples and cinnamon, the sound of laughter. It all receded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The phone vibrated in my hand again. She was calling back. I did not answer. I pressed the power button, silencing the call, plunging the screen back into darkness. I slid the phone back into my pocket. Across the table, Grandma Ray was watching me. Her eyes were sharp. She knew. I looked up at Jonah, who was waiting for me to respond to his joke. I forced a smile. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. On the turntable, the needle, which had been sitting in the groove at the end of the record, suddenly skipped. The arm lifted, reset, and dropped onto the next track. The music started again, but the song had changed. The night was over. The party wound down as slowly and softly as the snow had begun. By 10 p.m., the great hall was filled with the warm, sleepy haze of good food, good wine, and profound emotional release. One by one, my guests came to me, their eyes bright. Ms. Albee, the preschool teacher, clutched the envelope and the hand-knit blanket to her chest. "Peyton," she said, her voice thick. "This is not a gift. This is a miracle. This is a roof. Thank you." Jonah clapped me on the shoulder, his grip strong. "You did it, Pay. You really did it. You built a better table." Aunt Sarah, her framed photo clutched in her hand, just hugged me, pressing her cheek against mine. "You reminded me of who I was," she whispered. And then she was gone, disappearing into the night. I stood by the massive door, bidding them farewell. My phone, a cold, heavy weight in my pocket. Each thank you felt like a small twist of a knife. The sanctuary had been breached, and they did not even know it. I was smiling. I was nodding. I was the perfect host. But inside, my entire system was on high alert, running threat diagnostics. The missed call notification from Mom was burning a hole in my consciousness. When the last guest had driven down the long gravel road, I closed the heavy oak door. The silence of the hall was complete, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant clinking of plates as Nora and her team began to clean. I pulled my phone out. The missed call was still there, and a new one, missed call, Dad. I retreated to my office, the glass-walled room off the main hall, and shut the door. I could still see the main room, the dying fire, the long, empty table. I tapped my father's contact. He answered on the first ring. What? His voice was not a question, it was a low, furious bark. What do you think you are doing? I kept my voice perfectly level, the way I did when negotiating with hostile executives. Good evening, Dad. I'm just finishing up a dinner party. A dinner party, he roared. And I heard my mother's high-pitched sobbing in the background. A $7 million ranch. That's what you're calling it. That picture is all over town, Peyton. All over town. Do you have any idea what you've done? I hosted a dinner for my friends, I said, my voice turning to ice. The house is mine. What I do in it is my business. Your business, he spat. You have made this family a laughingstock. You have embarrassed your mother. You have embarrassed Karen, after everything we did to keep this Christmas quiet. You were uninvited for a reason, Peyton. You always have to make it about you. You are selfish. You shut this down. Shut it down now. The line clicked dead. He had hung up on me. I stared at the black screen. My hand was shaking. Not with fear, but with a sudden, seismic rage. Shut this down. The same dismissal, the same command to shrink, to disappear. My phone lit up again. Not a call, a text from a number I did not recognize. But the area code was Toledo. It was a screenshot, a forwarded image of a scanned document, an invoice. My eyes scanned the details, invoice. Holiday decorating services. The amount was for $5,000. The bill's two-line items made my blood stop. Ray Family Foundation. The ship-to address, my parents' house in Toledo, Ohio. I read the name 3 times. Ray, my grandmother's name. I had never heard of it. I zoomed in. Ray Family Foundation. The phone rang again, pulling me from my confusion. A Seattle area code. I answered, my mind still trying to process the invoice. Ms. Peyton Hughes, a dry, professional voice asked. This is she. Ms. Hughes, my name is Arthur Vance. I'm with the law firm Vance and Sterling. I am the retained counsel for Mrs. Ray, your grandmother. My heart seized. Is she all right? She's here with me. She's asleep by the fire. The voice on the other end let out a long sigh, a sound of profound relief. Oh, thank God. That is excellent news. I was worried. Worried about what? What is this? I've been trying to conduct a routine end-of-year review for her charitable fund, the Ray Family Foundation, he said. I have been unable to reach your parents, who are the fund's designated administrators, for several weeks. Their phones go straight to voicemail. The pieces clicked. The invoice, the name. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what that is. It's your grandmother's private philanthropic fund, Mr. Vance explained, his voice patient, but underlined with a lawyer's precision. She established it with your grandfather's estate. Its legal mandate is very specific, to provide winter warmth and assistance to the elderly population of Beach County, Ohio. Your parents have managed it for the last decade. He paused. The problem, Ms. Hughes, is that the foundation has made 0 disbursements to any charitable entity in over 2 years. Not a single grant. The only expenditures have been for administrative fees and consulting, all paid directly to a holding company registered to your parents. The air in my office became thin and cold, the dry, impersonal cold of Montana. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice flat. I am holding an invoice that was just sent to me. It's for $5,000 for holiday decorating, billed to the foundation, but shipped to my parents' personal address. There was a long, dead silence on the line. I could hear the lawyer breathing. Ms. Hughes, that would be a significant irregularity, a potential breach of fiduciary duty. I was calling your grandmother to strongly recommend an immediate audit and a freeze on the account. Send me everything you have, I said. Right now. I will make sure she sees it. I hung up. I was no longer shaking. I was perfectly, terrifyingly still. This was not about a hurt feeling. This was not about being uninvited to Christmas. This was about theft. I went to my desk and opened my leather-bound notebook. I flipped to the page with the plan for the dinner. I found the words I had scribbled at the bottom, calls equals risk. I drew a thick black line through them. On a fresh page, I wrote, Ray Family Foundation. I underlined it 3 times. Beside it, I drew an arrow and wrote, Grandma Ray doesn't know. My phone buzzed again. A new call. A local Ohio number. Beach County. I recognized the prefix. This is Peyton Hughes. Ms. Hughes. This is Chairman Davies from the Beach County Community Church. I apologize for the late hour. He sounded stiff, angry. We saw the photograph. Your aunt posted it. A remarkable family reunion you're having in Montana. A beautiful home. Thank you, I said. We were just so surprised to see it, he continued, his voice dripping with acid. Especially since your mother, Mrs. Hughes, informed our board that the Ray Foundation's annual Night of Warmth drive was cancelled again this year due to ongoing family health issues and the need to, as she put it, keep things small. The words, the exact 9 words from the text, this year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small. It wasn't an excuse, it was an alibi. Cancelled, I echoed. For 2 years running, Davies said, his voice rising. That grant heats the homes of nearly 50 of our elderly parishioners, Ms. Hughes. We have people, cold people, who relied on that money. Seeing that feast, well, it seems the family's health and finances have certainly recovered. Good night. He hung up. I felt dizzy. They weren't just cutting me out, they were cutting everyone out. They were cancelling charity drives so they could buy Christmas decorations. My phone buzzed. A transcribed voicemail notification from Karen. I read the robotic, sterile text, Peyton, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are going to ruin everything. Mom is hysterical. That picture. What is wrong with you? You're selfish. Stop this. Just stop. You are ruining Mom's plan. Plan. I stood up and walked out of the office. The great hall was quiet. Nora was wiping down the last of the counters in the kitchen. Grandma Ray was asleep in the oversized armchair by the fire. The cashmere blanket rising and falling with her gentle breathing. She looked peaceful, content. She had no idea that the legacy she had built was being hollowed out by her own son. Nora saw my face. She walked over, drying her hands on her apron. It was a good night, Peyton, she said softly. Then she saw my eyes. What is it? What happened? You look like you just saw a ghost. I saw a crime, I said. I looked at my grandmother asleep and safe by the fire. Nora, if the truth needs a seat, I think it's about to demand the whole table. Nora just nodded. Well, then, she said, looking at the long, empty table. It's a good thing you built one big enough. I walked back into my office. My mind was clear. The cold, precise clarity of an engineer who has just found the critical system fatality bug. This was no longer a family drama. This was a legal matter. This was evidence. I pulled up the legal code for the state of Montana on my laptop, one-party consent for audio recordings. It was perfectly legal. I spent 10 minutes installing a secure, encrypted call recording app on my phone, linking it to the private server I maintained for dry dock. Every call, every voicemail would now be logged, transcribed, and saved. I looked out the window. The snow had stopped completely. The clouds had cleared, revealing a sharp, brilliant moon over the mountains. The air was perfectly still. Outside, the storm was over. Inside, the hurricane was just making landfall. My phone rang. It was almost midnight. Caller ID, unknown number. A Toledo, Ohio area code. I let it ring twice. I took a deep breath. I pressed accept. The small red icon glowed in the corner of my screen. This is Peyton Hughes. There was a pause. A shaky, older man's voice cleared his throat. Ms. Hughes. My name is Gerald. Gerald Hines. I used to be the accountant for the Ray Family Foundation. Your mother fired me 2 years ago. He paused, his breathing heavy. I saw that picture tonight. Someone sent it to me. I think you need to see the real books. Gerald, I said, my voice sharp, my eye fixed on the glowing red record icon. Tell me what you know. They fired me just over 2 years ago, the man's voice quavered. Your mother said they were restructuring. They were moving the fund's administration in-house to save on costs. He paused. I thought it was odd, but it's their fund. Or I thought it was *** fund, I said. Its mandate is winter warmth for the elderly in Beach County. Yes, Gerald's voice cracked with a sudden, vindicated energy. That's exactly it. For 20 years, I wrote those checks to the church, to the county aid office, to the heating oil suppliers, every November like clockwork. Then they fired me. I still have access to the public-facing tax filings. It's required, you know. I checked them. He took a shaky breath. Peyton, for 2 years, there has been zero charitable disbursement. Not $1 to a single person. The only activity has been administrative fees and consulting expenses, paid out monthly, paid to a private LLC. An LLC registered to my parents. Yes, I finished the words, tasting like ash, at their home address. It sits over $60,000 a year, Ms. Hughes. They are just taking it. My email pinged. It was a secure message from Gerald. Moments later, another one from Mr. Vance, the lawyer. Per hour conversation. The subject line read. Gerald, stay on the line, I commanded. I clicked open the first file. It was a PDF of a bank statement for the Ray Family Foundation. It was exactly as he'd said. A healthy balance, untouched, except for the steady monthly drain. Administrative fee, $5,000. Consulting fee, $2,500. Then I opened the second file. It was a scanned document, an expense approval form authorized by my mother. It was dated 3 weeks ago. My eyes scanned the line items. Catering deposit, $1,500. Holiday lighting installation, $3,500. And the memo line at the bottom, the justification for the expense, Christmas decor, private event. My blood did not run cold. It evaporated. I felt a hot, blinding white rage. This year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small. The 9 words from her text message echoed in my head, but now they had a new, grotesque meaning. It was not a social slight. It was not about me or Karen, or keeping the family circle tight. It was an alibi. It was the excuse they gave to Chairman Davies, the excuse they gave to the church, the excuse they gave to the 50 elderly people sitting in the cold. They were keeping it small because they were spending the charity money on themselves and they could not risk having the community, the beneficiaries, the church, show up at their door. They had cut everyone out, me, the church, the entire county, to hide the fact that they were stealing. The phone beeped. A new call was trying to come through. Caller ID, Arthur Vance. Gerald, I said, I have to call you back. You've done the right thing. Send me everything. I pressed the button to put Gerald's call on hold. Every file you have. Do not delete anything. I clicked over. Mr. Vance, Ms. Hughes, the lawyer's voice was fast and clipped. I am glad I reached you. I have just spoken with the chairman of the Foundation's Oversight Board, Mr. Bishop. He is apoplectic. He saw the invoice you forwarded, Mr. Vance continued. He is apoplectic. He is demanding an emergency session, an immediate injunction. Good, I said. I stood up, pacing the office. The rage was gone, replaced by the familiar cold precision of a system architect facing a critical failure. Here is what is going to happen, Mr. Vance, I said. The meeting will be tomorrow, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. It will be a video conference. That's highly irregular, Ms. Hughes, Mr. Vance protested. A meeting of this gravity. Mr. Vance, I interrupted, my voice leaving no room for argument. My grandmother, Ray, the founder of this trust, is asleep in my living room. She is the primary stakeholder. She will be present here at Riverglass. I will not have her subjected to a hostile boardroom. The meeting will happen here. I will be inviting the administrators, my parents. I expect you, Mr. Bishop, and any other necessary board members to be on that call. Send me the secure link. I will distribute it. I hung up before he could object. The house was silent. The fire had died down to glowing orange embers. I walked out of my office and into the great hall. The long walnut table was dark, wiped clean, reflecting the moonlight from the massive windows. Nora was in the kitchen stacking the last of the clean plates, her movements slow and tired. Nora, I said. She turned, startled, wiping her hands on her apron. Peyton, you should be asleep. I need the table again tomorrow, I said. She sighed, looking relieved. Oh, well, that's fine. Will it be a late lunch? I have leftovers. No food, I said. I walked to the table and placed my hands flat on the cold, solid wood, the wood my grandmother had touched just hours before. Tomorrow, Nora, the table turns off the candles and we turn on the truth. Nora looked at my face. She looked at the dark, empty table. She looked at the armchair where my grandmother was sleeping peacefully. She did not ask another question. She just nodded, her face grim. I'll have the coffee ready, she said. I went back to my office. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, an email to Mr. Vance, Mr. Bishop, and Gerald Hines. The meeting is confirmed. 6 p.m. Mountain Time, secure link to follow. The founder will be in attendance. Second, a new, clean text message. I sent it in a group to my mother, my father, and Karen. Have been advised of catastrophic irregularities in the Ray Family Foundation. A full board review will be conducted via video conference tomorrow at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Your presence as administrators is mandatory. Grandma Ray will be here. This is not a trial. This is about giving my grandmother's money its seat back at the table. I immediately resenced their numbers. I did not need to see the panic. I did not need to hear the lies. I needed to prepare. For the next 4 hours, I worked. I was no longer a daughter. I was a systems analyst. I retrieved the high-definition laser projector from my media closet. I set it on a stand at the far end of the Great Hall. I aimed it at the massive, flat, pale grey stone wall beside the fireplace. I connected my laptop. I opened the first file Gerald had sent, the bank statement. The numbers, crisp and black, appeared 6 feet high on the stone wall. Ray Family Foundation. Statement. November. The administrative fee was as large as a dinner plate. I toggled to the next file, the invoice for the Christmas decorations. The signature, my mother's shaky and thin, was projected onto the stone, illuminated by the bright white light. The table. My beautiful walnut table was no longer a place for a feast. It was a boardroom. It was a witness stand. I retrieved a high-fidelity conference microphone from my office. I placed it in the exact center of the table. I ran the cable, securing it with gaffers taped to my laptop. I opened the recording software. I checked the audio input. I pressed test. The small green bar pulsed with the sound of my own breathing, the sound of the logs shifting in the grate. The system was live. My hands were steady as I taped down the cables. But as I coiled the last bit of wire, I felt a single drop of sweat run from my temple down my jaw. My palms were slick. This was not code. This was not a server. This was flesh and blood. This was the foundation of my entire life. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. I picked up my phone. I made one last call, disabling the silence setting for this one, and only this one. She answered on the first frantic ring. Peyton. Peyton. Thank God. You have to stop this. You don't understand. You have to take the picture down. Your father is. You are going to ruin us. Be here tomorrow, I said. My voice was not mine. It was the voice of dry dock relief. It was the voice of an algorithm that has found the fatal error. 6 p.m. Stop calling. Stop texting. Just come. I paused, then added the last, final command. And for the first time in my life, I need you to listen. I hung up the phone. I did not sleep. I sat at the head of my table alone in the dark and watched the silent, damning numbers burn themselves onto the cold stone wall. The sound of the gravel was different. It was not the tentative crunch of old trucks arriving in a gentle snow. It was the aggressive spray of tires, a heavy vehicle braking too hard, a black, rented Suburban. It was 5:55 p.m. The sun had set, plunging Paradise Valley into a deep, crystalline darkness. The only lights were the warm incandescent bulbs I had hung, the ones that now reflected on the long, polished surface of the walnut table. Nora had left me a pot of black coffee and retreated to the guest wing. She had done her part. The table was set, not with plates, but with a single microphone, my laptop, and a pitcher of ice water. At the far end of the hall, the projector was on, its bright white rectangle cast upon the massive stone wall by the fireplace, waiting. I sat at the head of the table. To my left, Mr. Vance and Mr. Bishop, the board chairman, were already patched in, their severe, waiting faces displayed on a large monitor. To my right, at the center of the table, sat Grandma Ray. She had woken just before noon. I had sat with her, the coffee pot between us, and I had explained. I had shown her the bank statements from Gerald. I had shown her the invoice for the Christmas decorations. I had not been gentle. I had been factual. She had listened, her face growing paler, her hands clenching in her lap. She had cried for exactly 10 minutes. Then she had stopped. She had put on her best wool dress, pinned a simple silver brooch at her throat, and said, "It is my name on that fund. I will be at the table." Now she sat beside me. Her spine was rigid. Her hands, wrinkled and papery, were placed flat on the dark wood, palms down. They did not move. It was not a gesture of relaxation. It was an anchor. It was an oath. The heavy front door opened. I did not get up. The sound of their arrival was a violation. It was the sharp, angry click, click, click of expensive, hard-soled heels on my quiet wooden floors. It was the smell of it, a cloud of heavy floral perfume that battled the clean, simple scent of pine and coffee. They stopped at the entrance to the great hall. My father, Robert, my mother, Elizabeth, and Karen. They were dressed for a funeral, or perhaps a hostile takeover. My father in a dark suit, my mother in a severe navy blue dress, her purse clutched like a shield. Karen behind them, her face pale and puffy, her eyes darting everywhere, refusing to look at me. They saw the room and for a moment, they just stared. They saw the projector. They saw the monitor with the lawyers. They saw Grandma Ray sitting at the table, staring at them with eyes that were as cold and clear as the lake outside. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice trying for authority, but edged with a tremor of panic. "Peyton, this is a circus. We are not doing this." "You are," I said. My voice was amplified slightly by the conference microphone, filling the hall. "You are administrators of a foundation, and you have been summoned to a board review. Sit." I pointed to the 3 chairs opposite my grandmother. My mother looked at her, at Grandma Ray. "Mother," she began, her voice a high, false whine. "I don't know what this child has been telling you, but it is all a terrible misunderstanding. This is private family business." "It has not been private business since you used my name to steal from the elderly, Elizabeth," Grandma Ray said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the perfume. "Sit down." They sat. The sharp scraping of the chairs was the only sound. I looked at the monitor. "Mr. Vance, Mr. Bishop, the administrators are present. The founder is present. I am recording this meeting." I hit the enter key on my laptop. The projector flared to life. The first image was the summary page of the Ray Family Foundation's finances for the last 24 months. I had prepared it myself. A simple, brutal graph. A dark blue line showed the balance. A bright red line showed the disbursements to charity. The red line was a flat, perfect zero. "This is the foundation your mother established," I said, my voice cold and even. "Its mandate, which I am sure you recall, is winter warmth for the elderly in Beach County. For 2 years, it has not provided a single dollar of warmth to anyone." "That is not true," my mother snapped, leaning toward the microphone. "We have extensive administrative costs. We have been restructuring. The market has been unstable." "The market has been fine," Mr. Vance's voice boomed from the speaker, making my parents jump. "We are here to discuss the administrative costs." I pressed the key. Click. The next image filled the stone wall. It was the scan of the bank statement Gerald had sent. The line item was highlighted in yellow. The size of a log, monthly administrative fee, $5,000, paid to Hughes Solutions LLC. "That is our consulting firm," my father said, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "We are paid for our time. It is perfectly legal. $60,000 a year, Robert," Mr. Bishop's voice was like ice, "to administer a fund that does nothing but pay you. A fund whose bylaws, which you signed, cap administrative fees at 4% of the annual disbursement. 4% of zero is zero." My mother saw her opening. "But we do disperse. We host the community festival. We have expenses. Ah, yes, I said. The expenses. Click. The image changed. It was the invoice. The $5,000 invoice for holiday decorating services. My mother's signature, shaky and thin, was projected onto the stone wall above the fireplace, 6 feet high. The ship-to address, their home in Toledo. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. That is part of the festival. The family festival is a community event. It's for the church. It brings people together. A lie, a new voice said. I looked over. Grandma Ray was looking at my mother, her eyes burning. I called Chairman Davies at the church this morning, Grandma Ray said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. He has not heard from you in 2 years. His Night of Warmth drive, which my husband started, has been cancelled. The people he serves are cold, Elizabeth, because your house is decorated. You don't understand, my mother pleaded, her eyes darting between me and the lawyers on the screen. It's complicated. The planning. Karen's wedding. We had so many expenses. We had to keep things quiet. We had to keep it small. You did, I said. I minimized the invoice. I opened a new file, an audio file. You were very clear about that. I pressed play. My mother's own voice, high-pitched and hysterical, filled the great hall. The recording from last night, Peyton, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are going to ruin everything. Mom is hysterical. You are selfish. Stop this. You are ruining Mom's plan. I stopped the recording. I let the word hang in the air. Plan. And this, I said. I pressed play on the next file, the voicemail she had left me just after the first phone call. Don't embarrass us in front of the church. In front of the church. My mother made a small choking sound. My father exploded. He shot to his feet, slamming his hands on the walnut table. The water pitcher jumped. Enough of this, he roared, pointing at me, his face purple. You did this eavesdropping, recording. This is illegal. This is entrapment. A family, I said, my voice low and clear, is a place where no one is forgotten. Not the daughter who wins the science fair, and not the old woman who can't pay her heating bill. You built a system that forgot both. I'm just running the diagnostic. My father stood there, trembling, speechless. I looked at Karen. She had been silent, her hands twisting in her lap. But now she was looking at the projector, at the bank statements, at the invoice for decorations she had probably helped pick out. Her face was ashen. Her lips were trembling. She was, for the first time in her life, seeing the architecture of her world. She was the sun, but she was seeing, finally, that her warmth was fueled by something dark and cold. She was seeing the map of favoritism, and realizing it was not just a map, it was a balance sheet. It was a crime. She looked down, her perfect facade cracking, and a single hot tear dripped onto her clasped hands. The silence that followed was absolute. Grandma Ray broke it. She leaned forward, her hands still flat on the table. Her voice was strong, echoing with the authority of her name. Robert, sit down. My father stared at her, then slowly, his rage deflating, he sank back into his chair. Grandma Ray looked at the monitor. Mr. Bishop, she said. I am the founder. My husband built this fund to keep people warm, because he remembered what it was to be cold. My name is on it. My legacy is in it. She turned her head and looked at my parents. If Justice needs a seat at the table, she said, her voice ringing with clarity, this table still has room for it. Mr. Bishop nodded, his face grim. Thank you, Mrs. Ray. Your wishes are clear. Effective immediately, by emergency authority of the board, the assets of the Ray Family Foundation are frozen. All administrative access for Robert and Elizabeth Hughes is revoked. You can't do that, my father yelled. We can and we have, Mr. Vance said. A formal vote of the board will be scheduled within 48 hours for your permanent removal as administrators. At that time, we will also be voting on whether to turn these findings over to the State Attorney General's office. My mother made a sound like a dying bird. She was staring at my father, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. My father looked hollow, shrunk. Then, in the devastating silence, a new sound, a phone ringing, a bright, cheerful, polyphonic ringtone. It was not mine. It was my mother's phone, lying on the dark walnut table beside her untouched purse. The screen lit up, illuminating her white, trembling hands. She did not move. We all read the caller ID, First National Bank, Mortgage Division. The room was silent. The phone kept ringing. My father looked at the phone, then at my mother, then at me. The realization dawned on his face, a slow, sickening wave of gray. The house, the perfect house in Toledo, the house whose loan, I now realized, must have been secured not by their income, but by the assets of the foundation they controlled. With the funds frozen, the guarantee was gone. The loan was in default. The phone stopped ringing. And the silence that fell was the sound of a guillotine. The phone stopped ringing. The silence that fell back into the great hall was absolute. A vacuum where the last vestiges of my family's denial had just been. My mother's hand was still frozen in the air, hovering over the dark screen. My father stared at that same phone, his face a mask of grey, hollowed-out shock. He looked like a man who had just seen the blueprints of his entire life, his entire identity. Catch fire. It was Karen who moved. She made a low, strangled sound, a sob that tore through the sterile legal quiet. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the wood floor. She stumbled as she stood. She did not look at my parents. She walked unsteadily around the long, dark table to where Grandma Ray sat, anchored to the wood. Karen fell to her knees. She did not fall gracefully, she collapsed, her hands grabbing at my grandmother's arm, her perfectly styled hair falling over her face. Grandma, she sobbed, the words muffled against the wool of my grandmother's sleeve. Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was your money. I just thought it was Dad's. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Grandma Ray looked down at her. Her face was not soft, not forgiving. It was just weary. She did not pat Karen's head. She did not offer comfort. She simply kept her hands flat on the table. The sound of Karen's raw, gulping cries was a distraction. This was not finished. I looked at the dark monitor where the lawyers had been. My voice cut through the sobbing, sharp and clear. Mr. Vance, Mr. Bishop, are you still there? The screen flickered back to life. We are, Miss Hughes, Mr. Vance said, his face grim. The bank call. That was, in fact, our fraud department liaison at First National, Mr. Vance continued. We informed them this afternoon of a potential catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty involving assets they held as collateral. Collateral. I repeated the word, tasting like metal. Yes, Mr. Vance continued, adjusting his glasses. Your parents' mortgage, it seems, was not a standard loan. It was a charitable preferred mortgage. A special rate and line of credit granted based on their stewardship of the foundation's assets. With that stewardship now frozen and under investigation, the loan is in default. The bank, as is their right, is calling the loan. Immediately calling the loan, my father whispered. He said it to himself, to the empty air. My mother heard him. She heard the words. She made a small, hitching sound and then she simply stopped. Her body went limp. She slumped sideways in her chair, her head hitting the solid walnut table with a dull, heavy, sickening thud. She was out. My father did not move to help her. He just stared at her as if she were a stranger. A piece of furniture that had fallen over. This was the end of the line. The system was broken. Now, the patch. This doesn't have to be the end, I said. My voice was quiet. But the microphone carried it to every corner of the room, to the lawyers on the screen, to my father, to Karen on the floor. It just has to be the end of this. My father slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. They were blank, defeated. I am not a lawyer, Mr. Vance, I said, but I am an engineer. This system is compromised. I see only one path forward that does not involve the Attorney General and criminal charges. I laid out the terms. My voice was flat, emotionless. I was not a daughter. I was an architect proposing a rebuild. 1. Full, immediate restitution. Every dollar taken in administrative fees and consulting expenses for the last 24 months, plus interest, every cent from the decorating invoice. It must all be returned to the fund. We don't have that money, my father whispered, his voice hollow. The bank, the house, we don't have it. Sell the house, I said, my voice unchanged. Sell the Suburban. Sell the paintings. I do not care how you get it. The fund must be made whole. That is the first non-negotiable step. I held up a second finger. 2. A full public apology, not to me, but to the community. You will deliver it in person at the Beach County Community Church, to Chairman Davies and his congregation. You will explain in detail what you did and how you are making restitution. My mother moaned, stirring. She was conscious. She was hearing it all. 3. I continued, you will sign tonight an irrevocable agreement to transfer full administrative control of the Ray Family Foundation to an independent third-party council. That council will be selected by Mr. Bishop and my grandmother. I looked at the monitor. Mr. Bishop, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice steady, if my parents agree to these 3 terms here and now, will you recommend the board forego criminal charges and focus on recovery and restoration? There was a long, heavy pause. Mr. Bishop looked at Mr. Vance. Ms. Hughes, if restitution is immediate and complete, and the administrators are permanently and irrevocably removed, the board's primary goal is, and always has been, the health of the fund. We would consider it. Grandma Ray had been silent. A marble statue. Now she spoke. Her hands, still flat on the table, seemed to press into the wood. One addition, she said. Everyone looked at her. I want an overseer, she said, her voice strong. Someone I trust. Someone who understands the numbers. Someone who will ensure the fund's data is public. She turned her head, her sharp, clear eyes finding mine. I want Peyton. I nominate Peyton Hughes to serve as a commissioner, unpaid, with the sole mandate of overseeing the fund's transparency. I stared at her. Grandma, I live in Montana. I do not care if you live on the moon, she said, her voice iron. You will not receive 1 cent. You will not control the money. You will ensure no one ever hides it again. You will make the books as clear as the glass in these walls. Do you accept? I looked at the table, at the new, heavy weight that was being placed on it. This was not a seat. This was a job. I accept. Then it is settled, I said. Mr. Vance, please draft the interim agreement. Stipulate those 3 conditions and my appointment. Email it to me now. My parents will sign it. I will scan it and return it. As if summoned by the finality in my voice, Nora appeared from the kitchen. She was not carrying champagne. There was no celebration. She carried a simple wooden tray with 5 earthenware cups and an old, steaming iron kettle. She placed it on the table, away from the electronics. She poured a cup of simple, dark tea. She pushed it toward my mother, who was now sitting up, her face a streaked mask. She pushed one toward my father, one to Karen, who had pulled herself numbly back into her chair. One to Grandma Ray, one to me. Signatures, Nora said quietly, her voice the only warmth in the room. Our best done with a clear head. My laptop pinged. The document had arrived. I turned the large monitor so my father could read it. He read the single page. My mother read it over his shoulder, her body shaking. It was a confession and a surrender. It was brutal. It was fair. I printed it. I walked back to the table and placed the single, warm sheet of paper in front of my mother. I placed a pen on top of it. She looked at my father. He gave a single, broken nod. Her hand shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen, she scratched her name, Elizabeth Hughes. She pushed the paper to my father. His signature was angry, sharp, a final jagged tear, Robert Hughes. I took the paper. I walked to my office, scanned it, and emailed it to Mr. Vance. The reply from the monitor was immediate. We are in receipt of the signed agreement, Mr. Vance said, his voice all business. This is a positive step. The board will meet in 48 hours, as planned to formally vote on your removal, and accept these terms as a remediation plan. We will be in touch regarding the transfer of assets. Good evening, Mrs. Ray. Good evening, Ms. Hughes. The screen went black. The meeting was over. The silence that fell was different. It was not a vacuum. It was just empty. I looked up. I had been so focused on the table, on the screens, on the signatures, that I had not noticed the others. Standing in the shadows along the far walls of the hall were the relatives I had invited, Jonah, Aunt Sarah. They had come as requested. They had stood in the back, silent witnesses to the entire execution. They had been the forgotten ones, and they had just watched the throne topple. No one clapped. No one cheered. Jonah just let out a long, slow breath. A sound like a tire hissing, a sound of pressure that had been building for 30 years finally being released. Aunt Sarah quietly wiped a tear from her eye. The room was cold, but it felt, for the first time, like a house that had just had its furnace lit. Grandma Ray's hands finally relaxed. She turned her palms over. She reached across the dark, empty table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was like paper, but her grip was strong. You did not just build a table, Peyton, she whispered, her voice thick. You opened the door for the whole family, even for the ones who had locked it. I looked at her. I looked at my parents, slumped in their chairs, broken and small. I looked at Karen, who was just staring at her hands. I looked at Jonah and Sarah, who were now quietly slipping out the front door, giving us space. The river glass table, I said, my voice clear. The dinner last night, it was a test. Next year, it is public. The night of one table will be a public fundraiser. The reports will be online, real-time. The books will be as clear as the lake outside. We are done with shadows. The communications. A small voice said. We all looked at Karen. She wiped her face, sniffing. The transparency, the online reports, the public apology. That's communications. It's PR, but it's honest PR, she said, looking at me, her eyes red, but for the first time clear. I'm good at that. I'm good at the format. Can I do that? Can I run the transparency part? I'll report to you and to the board. She was asking for a job, not forgiveness, a task. I recognized the pattern. She was hiding in her work. But this was work that mattered. I nodded. Just once. Draft a plan. Send it to my email. We'll put it on the table. We're putting the work on the table, Karen, not the people. My parents were slowly, stiffly rising from their chairs, defeated. They were leaving. The confrontation was over. And then my phone rang. It was not a family number. It was a local Helena prefix. I looked at the screen. Call 6. I answered. This is Peyton. Ms. Hughes. Hi, my name is Sarah Jenkins from the Helena local newspaper. I'm so sorry to call this late, but my editor got a tip, a photo of a dinner party you hosted last night. They are calling it the River Glass Table. It's an incredible story. I'd love to ask you a few questions about it. It was late, well past midnight. My parents and Karen had left without another word. The sound of their rented Suburban's engine had faded, and now the only sound was the wind, which had picked up again, bringing a fresh, light dusting of snow. The great hall was quiet. The projector was off, the monitor was dark. The microphone was put away. All the evidence of the confrontation was gone. All that remained was the table, long and dark, and the empty chairs. I was standing by the glass wall, watching the new snow swirl against the darkness, when my phone rang, the Helena local, the reporter. I picked it up. My hand was steady. This is Peyton. Ms. Hughes. Sarah Jenkins. I'm so sorry. I know it's late, but this story, a $7 million ranch, a feast for who was it? The forgotten. It's a house, I cut her off, my voice quiet but firm. And it was a dinner. But that's not the story, Ms. Jenkins. It's not. She sounded confused. No, I said, the story is the Ray Family Foundation in Beach County, Ohio. The story is about the Winter Warmth Fund for the Elderly, a fund that has been dry for 2 years. The story is about how it's being restored. This week, the story, Ms. Jenkins, is not about the table. It's about the people who need a table. It's about getting them their heat back before this blizzard hits the Midwest. There was a long pause on the other end. The Ray Family Foundation, she repeated. How are you connected to that? I was just appointed to the board as a transparency commissioner, I said. The dinner was just a private meeting of concerned citizens. But the fund, that's the story. You want to print something. Print that. Print that the fund is back. Print the new donation link. I'm setting it up right now. A donation link. Ms. Hughes, you've just given me a much better story. Yes. Yes, I'll print that. Can you send me the details? I can do better than that, I said. I walked back to my laptop. I sat at the head of my table. I'm about to make the fund's new dashboard public. I'll give you the URL. You won't need to ask me about the finances. You and anyone else can see them in real time. I gave her the information. I gave her Chairman Davies's name. I gave her the exact mandate of the fund. I did not mention my parents. I did not mention Karen. The system was patched. The names of the old, broken code were irrelevant. Thank you, Ms. Hughes, she said, her voice all business now. This is a real story. It'll be on the front page tomorrow. I hung up. I spent the next hour working. I was back in my element, not as a host, not as a daughter, but as an architect. I built a new, simple, transparent web portal for the Ray Family Foundation. I linked it to the newly unfrozen and soon-to-be-replenished bank account. I built a dashboard, A simple graph that would show, every single day, total donated versus total dispersed. I turned the projector back on. I aimed it at the stone wall above the fireplace, but this time it was not an invoice. It was not a bank statement. It was a live feed of the new dashboard. The total dispersed line was a flat, perfect zero. But I knew that line was about to climb. My phone rang again. The last call. A Toledo, Ohio number. Area code. Chairman Davies. Ms. Hughes. Peyton, he said, his voice no longer angry. It was thick with an emotion I could not place. I just got off the phone with Mr. Bishop, and with your grandmother. She told me everything, the restitution, your plan. He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. Peyton, thank you. Thank you for giving our people their warmth back. It was her money, Chairman, I said. I just helped her find the light switch. You did more than that, he said. You've given us an idea. This night of one table. I told Mrs. Ray our church would be honored to co-host the real one here in Beach County, a public fundraiser. Just like you said, we'll handle the food. You just keep that dashboard running. Can we partner on this? I looked at the long, dark, empty table. It had started as an act of defiance, a way to cut myself off, and now it was a bridge stretching all the way from Montana to Ohio. Yes, Chairman, I said. We can. I'll have Karen send you a plan. I ended the call. The hall was silent. I looked at the 28 mismatched chairs, all pushed back, some angled, markers of the souls who had sat there. They were no longer the periphery, they were the center. No more side tables, I whispered to the empty room. My phone buzzed. A text message from Grandma Ray. She was in the guest suite, supposedly asleep. I am so proud of you. Your grandfather would have been. You did not just make a statement, Peyton. You made Christmas about doing right, not just an event. Sleep well, my girl. I smiled, a real, tired smile, but I was not done. I walked to the large storage closet off the main hall. Inside, wrapped in heavy canvas, were two massive, solid planks of black walnut. They were the extensions, the leaves for the table. I carried them out one by one. They were heavy, but I was strong. I locked them into place, one at each end. The 40-foot table was now 50 feet. I thought of Jonah standing in the doorway, his 3 folding chairs under his arm. Just in case we need to make this table longer every year. We will, Jonah, I said to the quiet. The house was finally settling. In the kitchen, Nora emerged. Her work done. She walked through the great hall. Not looking at me, just at the table. She paused, then went to the main panel and shut off the kitchen lights. The hall was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the last dying red embers in the fireplace and the steady, bright white light of the projector. The embers cast a final liquid red reflection, like a river of wine, flowing down the newly lengthened, polished surface of the wood. I walked to my office and came back with one last thing. It was a small, simple block of wood carved from the same walnut as the table. I had made it weeks ago for myself. I placed it in the very center of the table, right where the microphone had been. In simple, clear, carved letters it said, "You belong." I stood there, just breathing. Outside, the last gentle flakes of snow were drifting down, illuminated by the warm incandescent lights on the eaves. Those lights, they were not a defiant beacon. They were not a "look at me." They were just a welcome. They were the lights of a house that was finally, completely, a home. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I looked at the "Do Not Disturb" setting, the silence rule, the digital firewall I had built to protect myself. My finger hovered over it. Then I turned it off. I set the ringer to low. If a call came in, if someone needed a seat, I wanted to be able to hear it. My laptop, sitting at the end of the table, pinged a new email. Subject: Ray Family Foundation, Board Resolution 12 halves. I opened it. It was from Mr. Bishop. The language was formal, legal. This email is to confirm that the board of the Ray Family Foundation has voted unanimously, 5-0, to accept the terms of the remediation agreement. The removal of Robert and Elizabeth Hughes as administrators is permanent, effective immediately. The transfer of assets for full restitution has been initiated by their bank. I read the last line, and the air left my lungs in a single, quiet rush. The Winter Warmth Fund is hereby fully restored. Emergency disbursements for all eligible Beach County residents will resume this week. I closed the laptop. I looked at the stone wall where the graph of the fund was projected. I looked at the dark, empty hall. I looked at the long, massive table, my table, stretching out before me, ready. And I smiled. I sat down in my chair, at the head of my table, and I finally felt at home.